Singapore. The tropical heat of Singapore hit Nellie when they were still waiting in line at passport control. Once through the line and into the terminal, they moved through the crush at baggage claim. Sammy scanned the crowd. It had taken them a night and a day to reach Singapore, with stopovers in Los Angeles and Hong Kong, and Nellie felt sleep tugging at her eyelids. All she wanted was a cup of strong coffee. A donut wouldn't hurt either. "Shouldn't we find a taxi?" Nellie asked. "Won't need one." Men in dark suits and caps stood on one side, holding signs. Sammy found one that said Murad. "Have I mentioned that Uncle James is loaded?" "Never turn down a chauffeur holding a sign," Nellie said. "One of my life rules." The chauffeur drove through the city, past office buildings and down lovely boulevards. The roads had been washed by an early morning rain. Glittering tall buildings marched along wide streets. They passed through a business district, and suddenly they were in a quiet neighborhood of beautiful homes. The driver turned down a street lined with palm trees. Nellie glimpsed stately homes behind a screen of lush greenery and flowering trees. The driver pulled into a long drive, masked with blooming pink and yellow bushes. A modern white house was at the end of the drive. A petite young woman stood in front, strikingly pretty in a yellow sleeveless dress, her black hair in a bun. As the car drew up, Nellie could see that woman was older than she appeared, middle-aged and gorgeous. As soon as the car stopped, Sammy bounded out and into a hug. Tiffany Chen held him at arm's length. "You get taller every time I see you. How are you, Darsh and Maya?" "How are Darsh and Maya?" "Fine, I guess. I haven't heard from them in a few days, have you?" Nellie nodded, and the anxiety in Sammy's voice. Tiffany Chen shook her head. "They're probably spending all their time in the lab. Typical. Aunt Tiff, I want you to meet Nellie Gomez. Nellie, this is Tiffany Chen." "How do you do, Mrs. Chen?" Nellie said, striving for her most formal manners in the midst of such elegance. "Oh, call me Tiff." Tiff shook Nellie's hand. "I'm sure we'll be great friends. I've heard about you. You're rather a legend among the Cahills." "Me?" Nellie was taken aback. "The fearless, magical Nellie Gomez," Tiff said. "Feats of incredible bravery. Got shot in the shoulder, and the bullet was dug out without an anesthetic. Basically saved the world with the help of this kid here." "Oh, yes, Nellie, I've heard of you. Now come inside. James is in his office. I know he wants to talk to you too." "As I told you on the phone, we think that the Outcast was operating in Singapore until recently," Sammy said as they walked up the stairs to the front door. At first, I thought the outcast takeover was just a joke, Tiff said, her lips pressing together. It all sounded so ridiculous. I thought it would last a few hours at most. The Cahills have always battled and sniped at each other. It's why we got out. Tired of the fighting. I didn't realize you were outside of the Cahill circle now, Sammy said. Uncle James set up the stronghold here. Yes, James was very involved for a time, but that was several years ago, before the clue hunt, really. We had quarrels with Bay O's leadership, and we fell away. Nellie nodded. She couldn't blame them for having problems with Bay O. He was a ruthless despot, safely in prison now. The atrium was open and airy with skylights for illumination. White sofas ran along one whole wall, and bright paintings were splashes of color on the walls. Fans revolved overhead. Exquisite orchids sat in blue and white pots. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave a view of green gardens, flowers, a tennis court, and a turquoise pool. Sammy, you're here. A young girl raced toward them, her ponytail streaming out behind her. She looked like a miniature adult in a navy blazer and skirt, and white shirt and tie. Mabel. Mabel! Sammy bent down to give the girl a hug. My daughter, Mabel Rose, Tiff said with an indulgent smile. Mabel, this is Nellie Gomez. How do you do? Mabel said. Her tone was polite, despite the fact that Sammy had her in a headlock and was giving her a noogie. I used to baby for this. Squirt, Sammy said. We used to catch lizards in the garden. Are you here to investigate what's going on? Mabel asked. Is there going to be another clue hunt? Because I'm old enough now to join in. I'm 11. Tiff frowned. You know the rules, darling. You are not to be involved in Cahill affairs. James! A handsome man in shirt sleeves hurried toward Sammy. James shook Sammy's hand, then hugged him. Sammy, I was so glad to hear you were coming. I have been monitoring ECAT chatter for the past 24 hours. I'm shocked at how many ECATs are listening to this madman. We heard the outcast called a meeting in Singapore, and some high-level Cahills were invited, Sammy said. James nodded. I heard this too. We were not invited, Tiff said. They know how loyal we are to Grace's memory. Did you know Grace well? Nellie asked. Not intimately, but she was a force. Tiff smiled. A role model for me. She was so strong. And how are Amy and Dan? I heard they left the family. They're back, Nellie said. They're helping to stop the outcast. My kiddos would never let down the family. I had no idea they were back. That's good to hear. I think there's got to be someone who will talk about the outcast, Mabel said. I have a suggestion. Tiff turned, her displeasure evident. Mabel, this is not for you to concern yourself with. You have your studies. Your Chinese tutor will be here in 30 minutes, and you must practice your violin first. You have a tennis lesson at 4. You can catch up with Sammy at dinner. Yes, Mother, Mabel said. She gave one last reluctant look at Sammy before heading out of the room. I've used every contact in Southeast Asia, James went on. The next step is the other ECAT strongholds. If you could wrangle an invitation for me to visit, it would be terrific, Sammy said. Sammy, I'm overjoyed to see you, but I have to admit I'm worried, Tiff said. Can't you leave the investigating to James? I heard what the outcast is planning. He sounds ruthless, maybe crazy. This could be dangerous. She shot a quick, nervous look at James. Today I thought I was being followed. What? James exploded. And you didn't tell me? She put a hand on her husband's arm. I think you're confusing me with some kind of fragile flower. No one is going to get to me. Of course. You're more than a match for anyone. James softened as he put his hand over hers. I would never underestimate you. But we all need to be on alert. Tiff nodded. That's why I think Sammy and Nellie should relax and see what you can discover. But first, let's give our guests a chance to rest. They've had a long flight. Sammy, Nellie, let me show you to your rooms. They followed Tiff down quiet corridors to the back of the house, where they passed through a courtyard to a guest cottage. A suite of bedrooms led off a private sitting room. Tiff left them, suggesting they rest, and join them for dinner at 7. Nellie couldn't imagine resting. She dropped her pack in her room and wandered back to the sitting room. She poured a glass of iced tea from a frosty pitcher sitting in a bowl of ice. The tea tasted minty and cool. She opened the French doors to a small patio. The cool greens of the trees were brilliant against the blue sky. A colorful bird dipped and soared above, then came to rest on the branch of a tree. Sammy, Nellie called.